The views, opinions, and content of this show are those of the host, guests, and callers. They do not necessarily reflect those of Local Matters Broadcasting LLC, its owners, partners, affiliates, assigns, or heirs. Having said that, it's now time to say good morning, St. Johns County. Welcome to the weekly radio show of the St. Johns County Council on Aging, better known in our community as the COA. We are your local nonprofit agency who, for the past 51 years, has been leading and advocating for the dignity and independence of seniors and responding to their changing needs. I'm Brian Robinson, Program Director for COA, broadcasting to you live from the studio of WFOY 102.1 FM, your local radio station for news, sports, and talk. Before we get into our show, let me remind everyone that if you have a question, comment, or a suggestion for a radio show topic, or if you just want to compliment me on my ability to fold a fitted sheet, well, you can send that email to radio@coasjc.org. Again, that's radio@coasjc.org. Joining me this morning is Arthur Culbert to talk about St. Augustine Compassionate Village. Arthur is an educator, inventor, urban farmer, children's author, photojournalist, and philanthropist. Dr. Culbert has 50 years of experience working in higher education and nonprofits. He is a social entrepreneur. He founded the nonprofit organizations Health Literacy Missouri and Central West End Farm, co-founded St. STL Village, and established a foundation, A Gift Garden, a social activist since inventing the early medical school selection program in 1982. Dr. Culbert has dedicated his life's work to addressing inequities. He began his career at Boston, where he served for 31 years as a faculty member and a dean at the Boston University Schools of Medicine and Public Health. He achieved prominence in multiple areas, including minority medical education, student affairs, and undergraduate public health education. He taught undergraduate and graduate students, published and presented more than 100 papers on subjects ranging from medical students' responsibilities for treating patients with AIDS. He presented at World AIDS Conference in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and also to the relocation of baseball stadiums presented at the annual baseball conference at Cooperstown, New York's Baseball Hall of Fame. Upon his first retirement, he moved to St. Louis, where he spent his second career building a nonprofit organization, serving as founder, president, and CEO of Health Literacy Missouri, our nation's leader and the world's largest nonprofit community organization dedicated entirely to health literacy. During this time, he served as a member of the Institute of Medicine's Roundtable on Health Literacy, and along with other recognitions, was designated a healthcare hero by St. Louis Business Journal. He's the founding chairman of the board of STL Village and created the Central West End Farm, and with fourth graders, helped feed 10,000 families, providing healthy food for the hungry in the community for 10 years. He served as urban farmer in residence at New City School in the Central West End in St. Louis. Completed a 9-year term as trustee at the St. Louis College of Pharmacy while holding faculty appointments at the St. Louis University College for Public Health and Social Justice and at the University of Missouri School for Health Professions. He began visiting St. Augustine in 2016 and with his wife completed the children's book, A Gift Garden. He relocated to St. Augustine in 2020, where he rebuilt and relaunched Compassionate St. Augustine. In 2022, he is the co-founder of St. Augustine Compassionate Village, which is what we are here to talk about today. Arthur, welcome to the show.
Brian, thanks for having me. It's a treat to be here. Thank you.
Yes, so great to have you, and I feel like I'm in the presence of royalty. Like, you have this stellar career, and you've done a lot of great things, and it's so good to have you on the show with us to talk about this next project. Like, apparently you just can't figure out how to retire, right? And spend time on the golf course or just swimming laps in the pool all day, right?
Well, one, retirement's different for everybody. And two, I actually think that it's good modeling for older adults in that, men in particular, to me, sometimes are sitting on couches waiting to die. And, we get one chance to walk through this fire, and I'm going to make the most of it. And I understand at this stage of the game my purpose, my gifts, and having the health to still be able to use those to make a difference in people's lives creates great joy and satisfaction for me. So I'm humbled to be able to do this.
And I think what I'm finding, I've been in my role for 3 years, serving seniors, and it seems like a lot of people get to that retirement age. They have some things on a bucket list. They do those things, and then they're kind of lost, and they really need a purpose. And that's why a lot of people volunteer at COA. That's why people like yourself continue to stay involved in starting something else or being involved in something that's already established. And so I think it really is about continuing to have a purpose your entire life, isn't it?
I think without question. I think that many of us lose sight the importance of waking up in the morning. Why? What do we have to do? And yes, I like my downtime. I like my swimming. I lead a very modest lifestyle or whatever. But the ability still to be a vessel of change in our community is something I don't take lightly. And I'm able to do that, and I plan to do that. And I think that this village, which will be my last, I'm done. As I tell people, people have a hard time.
Famous last words.
People have a hard time believing that, but yes, and yep, I want a little bit more time. But my bucket list really includes having good people around me, being able to go to noontime mass, and do all these healthy things. I think that we probably, as a nation and society and as a world, would probably benefit from if more of us returned or chose to do those kinds of activities.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we're here this morning to talk about St. Augustine Compassionate Village. So first, if you would, this is our first segment. We're going to go to commercial break shortly. So just give a what is the impetus? What is the driving force behind getting St. Augustine Compassionate Village established?
Sure, and thank you. Well, it's no secret that most older adults want to live in their home. And I think recent ARP surveys show as high as 90% of individual older adults, want to continue to live in their home as long as possible. At the same time, St. Johns County, I think 28% of the population are 55 or older and growing, and is a huge concern to the county. And, how do we provide care and services and the like to this growing population? And so I was actually astounded when I came to St. Augustine, because at the time my wife and I said when we left St. Louis we would only move someplace that had a village. Well, here we are. We have no village. And great council on aging, and we have great services and great nonprofits in lots of ways, but there was never this intentional village that would work with individuals in this village at a grassroots level to try to provide the activities and services and what villages are capable of doing. And so that was really, it was like, well, we need to build a village here. And then I suspect, having had this experience in St. Louis where I co-founded one now 11 years ago, that helped also in terms of thinking, well, we could do this. And so we set out to do that, and in a really healthy way.
All right. Well, we're going to talk more about that during our time together. We're going to go ahead and take our first break right now. You are listening to the weekly radio show, the St. Johns County Council on Aging, and we'll be right back after these messages. And welcome back to the weekly radio show, the St. Johns County Council on Aging, here on WFOY 102.1 FM, your local radio station for news, sports, and talk. I'm Brian Robinson, Program Director for COA, joined in the studio this morning by Arthur Culbert, and we are talking about St. Augustine Compassionate Village. And let's just backtrack for just a moment, if we could, and kind of let's kind of zoom out, if we could, Arthur. First, let's talk about the village movement itself. Like, I'm assuming that this is you talk about St. Louis, you're starting one here, but I'm sure it's a larger movement, right? So kind of talk about the movement itself, how it began, how many villages there are throughout the country, or maybe even the world, if it's outside of the United States.
Thank you, Brian. So it is a large movement. I think it was started in 2002, and 4 women who I got to know actually in Beacon Hill in Boston, Massachusetts, sitting around one night to themselves saying, we have to figure out, we don't want to move. How can we stay in our homes? And they put together a business plan, a model that would allow them to recruit individuals, pay a small fee, a membership fee to be part of that village, and they called it Beacon Hill Village, and raise enough money to hire an executive director, and he or she would provide the kind of small services that individuals need to be able to stay in their homes longer, and then really to address the biggie, which is the isolation that comes with loneliness, results in depression of individuals as we age that stay by themselves. And I mean, we had a recent Surgeon General report, dealing with this exact topic within the past 12 months, and it's very real. We hear a lot about mental health issues and, all different age groups. But for sure, it's among older adults, and I see it day in and day out. You do, Akash, in terms of your role. So it's very real. There are now at least 280 villages, not only in the United States, but in other parts of the world. And that's a good point, actually. And it's well run. They're extraordinarily village friendly, and by that I mean if you have an interest to create a village, they have a toolkit that has all the best practices that you can think of over 22 years, a willingness to share it, with villages that are starting up. And so they really make it, quite user-friendly. As is my style, when I started to build one in St. Louis, I got involved at the national level. So I was on the national board. They actually tried to recruit me to come to D.C. to run it, and I said no. But I said, I really liked this young woman who was applying for the position. If you offer this person the job and she takes it and is willing to move to St. Louis, I will mentor her. And they said, why is she going to move to St. Louis? She's in D.C. I said, well, let's ask her. So, of course, she did. And so we had the headquarters is still there, on paper, and although it's more remote now. And but so we had a real, major part, in this. And I got to understand it, really, really well and be somewhat of a player as part of all that. And I enjoyed it. And but it grows. They have annual meeting. We have 6 other open villages here in Florida. We will be the 7th. We'll be the first one here in the northeast. The others are housed on I call it the left coast, more over towards Tampa. There's some in the central part of the state, and there's one down in Palm Beach. And I think the one in Palm Beach, though, has been around for maybe 13, 14 years, And so, and that's a good point, because villagers are it's not a safety net. This is for individuals who don't have that kind of money that they think or know they can go to, high-end assisted living. It just isn't going to work for them. And this, to some degree, provides that opportunity for that kind of service and lifestyle without leaving your home, as part of all that. And again, Palm Beach is a good one because, as we know, that's a fairly affluent community. And but it's a robust, thriving village, where people meet each other, become volunteers, help each other, and at the same time, we find villages in very low socioeconomic areas throughout our country as well. But oftentimes people see it as a safety net. In fact, that had been an issue here, when we first started. Well, people who can't do this. I said, no, this isn't what the village is for. It's really for people who can afford a small fee and want to give of their time to be involved, to volunteer, to help others as part of all that. And it's just proven to be, a really, really good model as part of all that. And again, for example, Washington, D.C. has 13 villages. Okay, They have a line item in their city budget of $1 million that supports villages. So people like villages because, one, they're not government, okay, in today's world. We wouldn't want anything to do with the government. And they're grassroots, so the individuals in the village, get to control them. And they're very cost-effective ways to provide services for older adults. And that's been demonstrated, documented, researched over now this 20 years by, really, really good researchers, And so we know it works. We have a blueprint on how to do it. And, the village in San Francisco is 600 members. I mean, I mean, I can't even imagine that. But again, I mean, the woman who runs that K is like a rock star. I mean, just to, have it organized to be able to do that kind of stuff. And so they're not insignificant, and they're throughout the entire country. And we have a really strong presence here in Florida. The statewide group is called Uplift, and the woman who chairs it, Cynthia, is great, gets us together. We meet every 2 months. We meet in person twice a year, and they're thrilled that we're coming on board here in the Northeast, as part of all that. And again, as we've started to move through the development of this, at the national level, the national executive director Zoomed with us, their board chairs Zoomed with us, the people who developed our database Zoomed with us. So people want to be helpful in terms of, what do you need, how can we be helpful, and provide those kinds of resources for people to get started. And these are complicated things to build. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces in building a village. And so for people to have that kind of assistance at that level, I think can make a really, really big difference.
So the one in St. Louis, kind of walk us through that as far as, how you got it started, how long did it take, what services did you provide? Because I think that will give us an idea of what you're hoping to accomplish here with St. Augustine Compassionate Village.
So I really didn't have much experience with aging at the time I was running this organization, the Healthfulness in Missouri, and I was getting ready to step down. And a fellow colleague from Pittsburgh used to walk her dogs every day, and she stopped in and she said, "Arthur," she says, "I have this friend Gloria, and she has this idea, and she wants to build this village, but she'll never be able to make it work. But would you meet her? I think that you could probably help her." So it was kind of like this Jewish matchmaking, and I had never met Gloria. She was this institution in the city, and had been an activist all of her life, and met her. And I said, "Gloria, I have no idea about aging." I said, "But yeah, let's do it." And so it took, I think it took 25 months. It took 2 years for sure. And because as part of that, you have to create a 501c3. We had an exploratory committee, a model that I used here, that we're using here right now, where this small exploratory committee of 7 people met every 2 weeks and began to figure out, what this village would look like, as part of all that. And we learned early on that it wasn't the size of the group, but it was the ability to have individuals who could work nicely together in the sandbox. Okay. And because there's a lot of smart, talented people, but not everybody can work together well in a group. And we actually had that experience. And by, the gift of God, one day they just said that they didn't want to be involved anymore. And we were like, God, this is great. And people saw the difference, in terms of, wow, you're right. Without that negative attitude, Arthur, I mean, and so we launched it, and it was fun. We had this big major launch party at the Missouri History Museum, and it was cute. We had, my mentor at the time was a woman who had started a village in Chicago, and she was really, really quite good at this. And she came, and some other members. And but afterwards, a woman came running up to me, and because I said, you need to set aside your spot now because we're only going to have so many. So we created this effective buzz. So she was so cute. She said, "Oh, God, we want to join so bad, but my husband's not here. Do you mind if I go call him first to make sure that, whatever type of stuff?" So it was cute. And we had good people. And our main goal at the time there was that St. Louis is known for its racial divide.
All right, hold that thought. That music means we've got to go to our next commercial. We'll continue our conversation right after this. All right, it's on, and I'm Brian Robinson, Program Director for COA, and I am joined in the studio today by Arthur Culbert with talking about St. Augustine Compassionate Village. But before we continue our conversation, let me just let all of you know, next week in the studio I will have Amanda Jones, and we are going to be talking about the benefits of laughter, and she is going to educate us on laughter yoga. So if you are in the mood for laughing next week, tune in because we're going to be doing some of that, and looking forward to that discussion with Amanda. But today I'm talking to Arthur Culbert, and we're talking about St. Augustine Compassionate Village. Prior to the commercial break, we were talking about the one that you started in St. Louis, and you were talking about the woman coming up to you, and like her and her husband were interested in being a part of it. And I'm assuming that worked out and they were able to get on.
Yeah, so I'm going to move along and not talk too much about certain things. Yeah, it worked really well. And again, 10 years later, went back, and the difference that we made in that room in many people's lives, it's just amazing. And, I looked around and I could remember, all these people that's, have fallen off a curve or in an accident or this or that, whatever, and the meals we made, the appointments we got them to. But I think what people really like about the village is the fact, two things. One is that they actually get to, meet people. Mm-hmm. So a really challenging scenario for people my age, audience, I'm 74, are people want to go out and they want to have a social life, but if they don't have somebody to go out with, or if they get to an event, they're not going to know anybody, they're not going to go. Mm-hmm. And the village turns that on its head. And, you immediately get to know people. You can go with somebody to an event. If you're going to get to the event, you're going to know people. So it really opens up that social door that people need and want. And this can be either during the day or in the evening or whatever, but the opportunity to go to events that are either educational or social are critical, and we learned that in St. Louis, and we also learned that that the activities is really the key to it. So, for example, after building it, I agreed to run the activities committee, and the first night, I stood up and said, so what kind of activities do you want? Because what's unique about the village is that if a member wants something, then that's our goal, is to create that. So Emma came up to me afterwards, a retired English professor from Washington University, looks at me in the eyes and says, "Poker." I've been played poker since I was a graduate student, So we created a poker game for her, of which I was a part. It met once a month for $3. You would sit around and eat little nibbles and maybe have some wine or whatever and just laugh and joke. Nobody really knew how to play poker, and that wasn't the real purpose. It was getting people together around something that was of some importance to a member of the village. And for 2 years, it was by far and away, the best activity that we had. And, as one small example, I think of how the villages are tailor-made to meet the needs and interests of individuals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would assume that each village is probably unique to its own community, right? Because when I, yes. I was in ministry for a number of years, and I started a church, right? And one of the things that I discovered in being in ministry is really every church is kind of unique, right? Its own culture, and then it's unique to its community. And so I would assume that the same is true about villages. Like you might find some similarities when you go to different villages, but each one's going to kind of be unique. And so I guess my question would be then, what are you hoping St. Augustine to be and to become?
Yeah. So what excites me about the village here that will open hopefully sometime later this year, when we built one in St. Louis, it was just a single village. The difference here is that we have a county manager, Joy Andrews, who understands the value of the village model. And there's a model within the village movement called a hub and a spoke. And what we will open up here with, we hope, is that the county will be the hub, and St. Augustine will be its first village spoke. So that will immediately allow us to broaden the kinds of people we can have on our board, access to the village itself, hopefully county support, all those kinds of things. And it's really important when you open to have the support of your local government. It's demonstrated that villages that open with city or county support have a way greater chance of growing quicker and being more successful. So we hope that that's the instance here. Here, it's been really important to identify what I think are significant institutional partners. And we didn't want to recreate the wheel, and we recognized the value of the Council on Aging from the very, very beginning. And Amy's been terrific. And again, we don't want to reinvent things. So the Council on Aging has so many opportunities and activities and events that we can take advantage of with our villagers by simply directing them there. For example, an educational example would be As you know, the last Friday of each month, Megan Walls, attorney, does a talk on end-of-life directives, okay? Everybody should take her classes. One, she's entertaining. Okay, this is a plug for COA. She's entertaining. She knows her stuff, and it's amazing. Okay, as part of all that, and maybe 8, 9, 10 people go, and that's great. But we're bringing the village, and because again, it's a great resource that's there. It's available, and villagers, just by knowing that other village will be there, will show up. As part of all that. The same time, we have so much cultural and social activity in the city. Okay, and you just have to say, okay, we're gonna do this coffee house. So we'll probably have, as an example, once a month, go to a different coffee house. People like to get together. People like to have coffee. We'll probably take a day trip. Once a month to New Smyrna, to wherever, that type of thing. So. Again, the activities need to meet the interest, of the villagers and, take advantage of the skills that some of the villagers have. I mean, we have some incredible villagers already, people like Sandra Parks, and what she can bring to it. We have a woman who runs art tours, so to take us to the Cumber Museum for an art tour. So, we have a guy who's a chef. And so just all these ways that you can get to know your fellow villagers and they can contribute, through different types of activities is, I think, really, really important and will be a hallmark as we do this, as we move forward to do them. So our other partners, in addition to the Council on Aging, the Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Hartwick, who I know is on your board, great guy who is already doing such great things with seniors. And, we will partner with him, as part of all that. And then the Lifelong Learning Institute with Flagler College. I mean, another great organization doing great things for older adults. We've already had some, events through them. And then the City of St. Augustine, which it's my understanding that they have never really supported a not-for-profit, through the city budget. Well, the village is part of their budget discussion, to see, they really believe in it. They really believe that this is a way to redefine aging in a way that helps people transition to St. Augustine. So we can finish up with that after the break.
Yep, we'll be right back after these messages. And welcome back to the weekly radio show, the St. Johns County Council on Aging, here on WFOY 102.1 FM, your local radio station for news, sports, and talk. I'm Brian Robinson, Program Director for COA, joined in the studio this morning by Arthur Culbert, and we are discussing St. Augustine Compassionate Village. And in this last segment, I'd like you to just kind of talk about how can people become part of St. Augustine Compassionate Village, like what's the age requirements, like what's the fee, so forth and so on. Tell people out there how they can get involved.
Thanks, Brian. It's an initiative of Compassionate St. Augustine, which is important for the listening audience to understand. And Compassionate St. Augustine, which has been around, will be 12 years this September. It's one of the many initiatives that are making a difference here in the community. So if you go to Compassionate St. Augustine's website, you will see on that clearly displayed St. Augustine Compassionate Village, and you can get all the information you want there. You can sign up for our newsletter that's about to begin. The cost for a membership is $50 for an individual, $75 for a household, loosely defined. We have had in the past husband and wife and their elder daughter. We've had 3 lesbians. We have had so just a whole mix. It doesn't really matter, as part of all that, and that fee then provides for you access to all the special activities that we will create, as well as services and access to vetted providers. So the biggest service is, of course, rides, and we do that for people coming and going to medical appointments and the like. And I used to really like that because it was a way to get to know people, as part of all that. And so that would be my suggestion. I will preface that, Brian, by saying that you have to live, quote unquote, within the footprint. So the first thing we did was develop a footprint. If you live in this footprint, you can belong to the village. Okay, so the very first villager was our mayor, Nancy Sykes-Klein. So when I told her, the day, and she said, "Well, I'll join." So that meant that the island was going to be part of the footprint, The next person who joins was this, rock star from around here, Sandra Parks, and she lives way down in the shores, so that means we're going to have the shores. And soon thereafter, Greg White from West Augustine joined, and so we have a big swath of West Augustine. So if you live going down Route 1 all the way to 206, and takes you across the island, the entire island, and then when you come back off of the Lions Bridge along the bayfront and kind of weaves its way back into West Augustine and back over to 207 down 1. So it's a big footprint, quote unquote, and but that's fine. The only thing about a big footprint is that the rides, can be a little bit long. So you just have to kind of monitor that, because there will be people that will try to abuse the system. But assuming that, goes okay, we'll be fine, with regard to all that.
And the fee is a monthly fee, correct?
The fee is a monthly fee, yes. So it's $50 a month or $75 a month, exactly. And that's pretty common. That's actually what we charged in St. Louis. And that is probably a little bit on the low side, nationally. It's probably more like $60 and more like closer to 100, and but it's fine, So the model where we get the money from are individuals' dues, hopefully local government, and as well as private foundations. There's great interest in a number of foundations around town to help us, and people in the community. And I stopped in to see somebody the other day, and she said, "So how's the village going?" I said, "We need cash." She said, "How much do you need?" I said, $10,000. She said, "Well, here's $5,000." And she says, "Once you open," she said, "I'll just put it on Facebook and we'll get you the other $5,000." So there's this recognition that, wow, this can really help older adults. This woman in particular has a mother who will probably be in the village. But just in general, this is a very, as you know, generous community. And there's a lot of people asking, and there's very few people, all the same people giving. But it's a very, very generous community, and particularly for something like a village where I think, people understand its significance and the impact it can make, here in this area.
Yeah, so somebody needs a ride to a medical appointment, and then basically you reach out to other villagers to say, "Hey, are you available to give?"
Yeah, so here's how that works. So in St. Louis, so we had a very cumbersome database, okay? It was kind of this Jimmy system that somebody had invented that used to do bookings at country clubs or something like that. So anyhow, a woman that was in the village in Santa Barbara, her son was a software engineer, and he said, "Mom, this thing is horrible. I can build a really good app." So we had this incredible app. So the way it works now, so Brian says, "Oh, I have a doctor's appointment, next Wednesday. If you're capable of," and not all are because these are older adults and you have to, allow for that. But if you can, you just text, the home base and say, I have an appointment at this time. And then we can send out that request to people who have already indicated they would be volunteers, but also that they're available on that day at that time. So it goes to the small group, and usually one person, another steps up and says, "Yeah, we can make that happen," as part of that. So, and it's a really secure database system. These people have gone to great lengths because, again, we take recurring charges, just like any other business today, as part of all that. And so that's what we expect in terms of its efficiency. We're learning the database right now, and the executive director, he or she, will have to be skilled at being able to do that. But it's not that complicated. If I can do it, it's not that complicated.
And then another thing is doing some social activities together, organizing those and helping people get to those to be able to socialize together, correct?
Yep, exactly. And either educationally or, more entertainment-wise, and or small trips that we take or whatever, so that everybody's included. If people need rides, that has never really been a problem, in terms of all that. That my experience with villages, and that the whole ride situation, people expect it to be inundated and stuff like that. It doesn't seem to be, quite, that big of a problem in terms of all that, and so. In summary, I think the village is going to be very intergenerational. We're going to work closely with Flagler College. We'll have lots of younger people as part of all that. We'll, make up programs that are appropriately in terms of education, I think, for folks, and take advantage of all the rich, opportunities that we have, including the Council on Aging and courses. So we will help feed your classes, okay? To be honest about that. And why are we going to create a sound bath class when for, $25 you can do it for 4 times for the month,
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and these are wonderful things, or a balance class or this or that or whatever. And again, there are people who, unless they physically know somebody, won't even go to a class, so, we may have great offerings, at the River House and things for people to do now, but if they don't have somebody to come with, they're not always going to come initially in terms of that.
True.
And I think that will kind of help us get our foot in the door with regard to all that.
Yeah. And it's hard stepping out and meeting new people, right? Especially, if you find yourself in that stage of life where, your spouse is now gone and your children are all grown up and live elsewhere, and now you're trying to venture out kind of maybe for the first time by yourself. And so that's a big step for folks.
No, without question, And the other piece that we didn't really get in enough detail about, I'll just say briefly in 30 seconds. So it's a marriage of the whole compassionate movement. So the compassionate movement started 18 years ago by a woman who wins the TEDx Award, and she uses the prize to create a compassionate world. So we as a city are the first compassionate city in America, the 20th in the world, and the city takes this very, very personal. This is really important to them. So we're able to marry this village movement and this compassionate movement to be the first compassionate village in the world. So what does that mean? So that means just all the principles of compassion that we infuse in our work that we do day in and day out, we'll bring over to the village.
All right. Well, that music means it's time for our show to end. Thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to sending people your way to benefit from the St. Augustine Compassionate Village.
Brian, thank you. It's been a treat. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you next week.